Hi, good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the launch of the Undergraduate Toolkit, a developmental resource for students and stakeholders. It is really lovely to see all of you here. I'm Dr. Layla Cassim. You're welcome to call me Layla, and a very warm welcome to everyone. We are still waiting for quite a few people to join us, but let's get started because we do have a busy program. The session is being recorded. I will share the recording with everyone after the session. So if you have network issues, if you are late, you can then catch up with the recording afterwards. We know that also, unfortunately, there is load shedding in South Africa. And I know that some of our delegates and presenters have been affected by the load shedding. So again, please don't worry. The session is being recorded and you will be able to catch up afterwards. Also, I'm not going to be locking the Zoom session. This is, I'm going to keep it open throughout, so in case anyone does have any network issues and needs to reconnect. Colleagues, before we get started, if the power goes off on my side, I'm not expecting load shedding on my side for the duration of the launch. But if the power does go off, please just give me a few seconds to reconnect. I do have a backup Wi-Fi that does not rely on electricity, so please don't go anywhere. It literally just takes less than 10 seconds and the session will then resume. I see many familiar faces in the group, people who have been at some of my research workshops in the past. It is lovely to see you again. Some new faces as well. So thank you so much, colleagues, for your support and for being with us on a very special day, despite the difficult circumstances with the load shedding. And also, I'm really happy to say that we have such a wonderful turnout from KwaZulu-Natal province. Last week, we witnessed the devastation in KwaZulu-Natal with the flooding that has so badly affected the province and other areas in South Africa as well. Our thoughts and prayers are with everyone from KwaZulu-Natal, people who have family in KwaZulu-Natal. We hope that you are all safe. Thank you for still being, making sure that you are here at the launch. And in particular, when I do some special welcomes just now, you'll see that we have a wonderful turnout and support by the University of KwaZulu-Natal and also Durban University of Technology and also University of Zululand. So despite the difficult circumstances in KwaZulu-Natal, we really are very touched and very humbled and thankful that our colleagues from KwaZulu-Natal are still able to attend. All right, so a bit of background in terms of where the toolkit comes from, a bit of the history of the toolkit, what you can expect in this launch. So we will be finishing at about 12:30, so about a 2.5-hour launch. So thank you so much for everyone for availing yourself and for spending Friday morning with us. We are very thankful. I run my business, Layla Cassim ERS Consultants. My business is 11 years old, and I specialize in providing support to postgraduate students and emerging researchers. So I run research-related workshops on topics such as how to write a research proposal, how to apply for funding, how to write a thesis, research design and methodology, how to publish a paper, etc. This undergraduate toolkit that we are launching today is a project that is a joint project between my business and my parents' business. So the Renaissance Network, which is my parents' family business. It's a 23-year-old business in the field of human resources and labor law consultancy. And it is a joint partnership. It's a joint product that we have developed in collaboration and with the contributions of many people. It's lovely to see many of our contributors here with us today. It really is a pleasure and an honor for me to be hosting this session, and a very warm welcome to everyone. So good day, namaste to all our guests, to our presenters who are with us. Thrilled that our keynote speaker, Mr. Kaya Sitole, has also joined the session. Looking forward to Kaya's presentation shortly. And also to see all our guests and contributors and those who have made a contribution to the Undergraduate Toolkit. A special message of gratitude also to the reviewers of the toolkit who have joined us. So in particular, Professor Daisy Selematsela, who is with us. I see her in the room. Also, Dr. Jay Govender, who is with us as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Pelani Nongogo and Mr. Bongani Makatini. So they've all been reviewers who've had a look at the toolkit and who have given us the go-ahead. In particular, I would like to say a very special welcome and a thank you to Mr. Kaya Sitole, who, in addition to offering the keynote address today, also wrote the foreword to the Undergraduate Toolkit. It is a very insightful foreword that really just places this initiative within a wider context, looking at the higher education sector in South Africa and the broader societal context as well. So thank you very much to Kaya for the wonderful foreword and also for being our keynote speaker today. Thank you also to the presenters. Many of our presenters are with us already, so thank you so much. Looking forward to your presentations. Thank you also for being so organized, and those of you who are going to be sharing slides have sent it to me already, so thank you for being so easy to work with. Colleagues, a warm welcome to every single person who is with us. And we value your attendance. I know that many people are going to be watching the recording afterwards and catching up afterwards. So to those who are watching afterwards, thank you so much. We have a lot of very special people. I just want to, in particular, highlight a few names. So a very warm welcome to Professor Musa Selepi from the University of Limpopo, Ms. Nogutula Zama and her team from the CSIR, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the largest research organization in South Africa. I would also like to say a very special welcome and thank you to Dr. Sinazo Nomsenge from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. As I mentioned, we've had such a wonderful response from UKZN and the other KwaZulu universities. Then also Ms. Zinhle Ntuli from University of Zululand. Wonderful to see you again, Zinhle. Professor Sibusiso Moyo from Durban University of Technology, who's been an old supporter. I remember having a launch of the Postgraduate Toolkit many years ago at DUT. So thank you very much, Prof. Moyo, for your ongoing support. Professor Vivian Ojong from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, also Professor Albert Modi from UKZN. Then a very, very special thank you and welcome to Professor Silas Egbowon from Lagos State University in Nigeria. Mr. David Modiba from the Department of Higher Education and Training in South Africa. Dr. Tony Shabangu from the University of Johannesburg. I see that Professor Vivian Ojong has just joined us. So Prof. Vivian, welcome. I've just given you a special welcome as well and acknowledgement. Ms. Hala Murray and Professor Len Hansen from Stellenbosch University. And then also in particular, I would like to thank and welcome the student representative councils, the SRCs, in particular from UKZN. The SRC from UKZN has been phenomenal in terms of spreading the word about this launch. Thank you so much. And also the UKZN from the university currently known as Rhodes University. So the SRC president and other office bearers from university currently known as Rhodes have been tremendous and very supportive as well. So a huge thank you to all of you. And then to everyone else who is with us. I hope that you'll enjoy the session. I've kept the chat function open, so I would like this to also be an interactive session. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat function. You can also send me a private message if you prefer. I'm not going to respond to the chats immediately. What we'll do is that at certain time points in the presentation, in the launch, I'll then turn to the chat function, and then we'll see if there are any questions that we need to then respond to. So in the meantime, please keep the messages coming, and we will address the messages in the chat function at certain points, at different time points in the launch. I hope that those who have been having technical issues have managed to sort it out again. Perhaps you may need to log out and then try and log in again. Zoom also has a feature where you can test the audio, so you can test to just make sure that you can hear properly as well. So colleagues, please, I hope that no one is having any technical issues. Right, so before we get into Kaya's keynote address, and I'm really looking forward to that, just to give you a bit of background about the Undergraduate Toolkit, the history of the toolkit, how it came about, and also just to put it within a wider context. And I'm also just going to give you a sneak peek of the Undergraduate Toolkit so that you can see what it looks like. Later on, Kutsia, my mother from the Renaissance Network, is going to be giving us a more detailed presentation, which is actually going to take you through the contents of the Undergraduate Toolkit in more detail. But that'll be a bit later. I'm going to give you a sneak peek so that at least you know what to expect. Now, I think that it is very important that we reflect on the context in which this initiative is being offered in South Africa and also on the African continent and more globally as well. Last week, as I mentioned, we saw the devastating floods in KwaZulu-Natal and other parts of the country, which have really just highlighted the colonial and apartheid era spatial planning in South Africa and the painful legacy that we are still living with. Last month, so in early March 2022, the World Bank released a report which once again found that South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, with a huge disparity, in particular in terms of race. And a key determinant also is the impact on education. In particular in South Africa, race then impacts on education, access to education, the quality of education, which then impacts on income, and that is just leading to a situation where the inequalities are being exacerbated. The World Bank reports also raised very serious findings regarding gender income inequalities in South Africa, a gender pay inequality of more than 30%, within South Africa, which is a very worrying finding as well. So we know that, the socioeconomic situation is dire. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these inequalities. Using the expanded definition of unemployment, an unemployment rate of 44% in South Africa, which is the worst in the world, and which has been, made even worse as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown measures, and the millions of jobs that have been lost. So the situation is very dire, and it is within this context that we are gathered today. There was a recent report also co-authored by the HSRC, the Human Sciences Research Council, which found that the educational system in South Africa is the second most unequal in the entire world, second to Turkey. And the report basically talked about parallel educational systems in South Africa, where on the one hand, we have a minority of very privileged and well-resourced schools in the country. And on the other hand, we have the masses and masses of schools that are seriously disadvantaged and under-resourced. So it's like two different systems, educational systems in the country. So, I think these are very worrying findings. And if you also look back to 2010, I see that Professor Len Hansen from Stellenbosch has joined us. So Prof. Len, good to see you. And I just gave you a special acknowledgement a few minutes ago. So Prof. Len, thank you for joining us. In 2010, the Academy of Sciences of South Africa, ASAF, released a report on the state of the PhD in South Africa. And I think you'll be able to find that ASAF report from 2010 very easily if you search online. A very worrying report where they basically showed that South Africa is struggling to produce PhD graduates. So for example, if you compared the figures to Brazil, South Africa at that stage was producing, half of the PhD graduates that Brazil was producing. So South Africa as a country is struggling to produce PhD graduates. And then the ASAF report looked at why is this the case? So the barriers and the stumbling blocks and the problems that are making it difficult for South Africa as a country to produce more PhDs. And it's a very interesting report raising very worrying findings. And one of the findings that the ASAF report highlighted is what they call pipeline constraints. So in other words, they were saying that we can't just look at the problems and barriers at a PhD level. We have to look throughout the pipeline, the entire educational system. So we have to look at people who are currently doing a master's, people who are doing an honors, are they being capacitated and encouraged and supported so that they can then go on and do a PhD? We have to look earlier on in the pipeline. So we have to look at our undergraduates, degrees and qualifications, and are those undergraduate qualifications and programs and curricula actually preparing students to do postgraduate study at a later stage? And then even looking, earlier than our undergraduate system, looking at our schooling system, our basic education system in South Africa. And this applies to other countries of the continent and other countries of the world as well, because these problems are generic. So many of the problems that people are experiencing, whether as undergraduate or postgraduate students, can then be traced back to our schooling system. And we have many people from the education field who are with us today, people who are doing very important activism and work in our schools with high school and primary school learners. And it is such important work, because actually the problem goes all the way back to our foundation phase, because the foundation phase then sets the building blocks and the, for the rest of primary school, high school, and then students start university either on a stronger or a weaker note. So it's the entire system that we need to address. So within this context, we are offering this undergraduate toolkit. So how did the idea of the undergraduate toolkit actually come about? So in 2005, that was 17 years ago, I started a master's degree. And my mother, Kutsia, as a very committed parent and caregiver, she was trying to find me support material. So she was trying to find me textbooks on research and textbooks on how to write a thesis. And she really struggled to find anything. So there definitely was a gap that we noticed in the market all the way back in 2005. And 11 years ago, when I left my job as a lecturer and I decided to start my own business, and I decided to focus on postgraduate and research development, Kutsia had the idea, and she said to me, why don't you develop a postgraduate toolkit? So a learning resource for postgraduate students to help them actually understand basic concepts in research and to complete their research projects successfully, because we know that we've been struggling to find that kind of support material over the years. So there's a gap, and maybe we can contribute towards that. So that's what I did. So in 2011, I developed and I launched the Postgraduate Toolkit, which covers the entire research process, and it's aimed specifically at postgraduate students or those who are going to be registering for a postgraduate qualification. So over the last 11 years, different editions of the Postgrad Toolkit have come out. I've tried to improve the product. I've brought in new material. I've tried to make it more interactive. There are voice recordings. To those of you who are interested, at the end of this launch, I'm actually going to take everyone through the Postgraduate Toolkit. So if anyone would like to get a copy, you are then welcome to. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Postgrad Toolkit, I will take you through it at the end of this launch. So please don't go anywhere, especially for those of you who are postgraduate students or who are final year undergrads and thinking of doing a postgrad degree. So those of you who are supervisors, who are research, the staff at your universities who are involved in postgraduate development, I will take you through the contents of the Postgrad Toolkit and some of my research workshops right at the end of this launch. So that's what I've been working on over the last 11 years. The fourth edition, which is the latest edition of the Postgrad Toolkit, came out last year, 2021. So it is quite new. And I've brought in a lot of information, especially regarding the effects of COVID-19 on research projects, because many researchers have had to change their research design and methodology in light of COVID-19. So the Postgrad Toolkit is available on USB. So this is what the USB looks like. And it's also available online where it can be downloaded. So I've been very busy over the last 11 years, working on updates and different editions of the Postgrad Toolkit. So it's now in the fourth edition. I run research workshops around the contents of the toolkit. And now in light of COVID-19, these workshops are being held online. So throughout these last few years, Kutsia again has been saying, but what about an undergraduate toolkit? Why don't we come up with an undergraduate toolkit? And it's been a bit challenging for me in terms of time, because I haven't had much time to devote to it. a year ago, so in the last year, my family then made a commitment, and we committed to actually developing the undergraduate toolkit and to launching it. So that is just a bit of the history and the background to the undergraduate toolkit, so that you can see where it originates from. So it originally Kutsia's idea was the postgrad toolkit, and then we said, but no, the undergraduate market is actually larger. There are more undergraduate students, and it's important that we lay a solid foundation and basis in the undergraduate years, so that people who then go and do a postgrad degree will then start off from a more solid foundation. That's a bit of the history of the undergraduate toolkit. So this is a family initiative. Various family members have contributed, have written up different chapters. In particular, my brother Rieaz has authored several chapters, has co-authored others. My father, Advocate Layla Cassim, as well. My partner, Dr. Meryl Duplessis, who will also be talking to us a little bit later. She's authored a chapter on students with disabilities. So everyone has come together, and I mention this now because this has not been a job. This has been a labor of love, together with all the people who've worked on this project. So this really is our contribution as a family, towards addressing the inequalities in the country and on the continent. So the societal context that I painted earlier on, the societal context which is unconscionable, and I think it leaves all of us with a very important responsibility to do work that contributes towards addressing and decreasing these inequalities. So within this context, the postgraduate and also now the undergraduate toolkit are our humble offerings as a family towards skills development in South Africa. I understand that our keynote speaker, Kaya Setole, does have some time pressures and time commitments. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kaya for his keynote address. And when Kaya is done, then I'm going to give you a sneak peek into the undergraduate toolkit so that you can see what it looks like. And then we'll have some more presentations as well. So without further ado, it is a huge honor for us to welcome Kaya Setole, very well-known public personality in South Africa, a chartered accountant by profession, well-known academic, consultant, activist, writer, radio host. Kaya, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to you. So you are able to unmute. And also, Kaya, I've also allowed you to share your video. So if you would like to share the video, you're welcome to as well. Kaya, thank you so much for joining us all the way from the UK, where you are currently. Over to you, Kaya. Warm welcome.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I thank you in particular to the team at the Renaissance Network and Layla for giving me an opportunity to participate in this remarkably important launch. The launch itself comes at a very, very interesting intersection point for South Africa. And I think what makes this a very important intersection point is that if you looked at the statistics that we keep getting from Stats SA about the labor market developments in South Africa, you can clearly see that there is indeed a crisis. And South Africa has got what I refer to as a dual crisis of unemployment and unemployability. The unemployment crisis is obviously very well understood and is very well known, and its intersection points are something that everybody is trying to grapple with in one form or another. But what has become clear to me in recent years is that there is also this very important conversation that needs to be had about the crisis of unemployability. And that crisis of unemployability essentially emerges when the people who've been lucky enough to be part of the labor market in one form or another are finding themselves displaced by different circumstances out of that labor market itself. A couple of years ago, there was a big story about one of the big banks, which was Standard Bank, that had said that, look, we no longer see a need for some of these branches to exist, so therefore we're going to close them down. And of course, for people who have been working in those particular institutions and have developed particular skills, the question of where those people go became the new crisis point. And if those people cannot be reskilled and upskilled in ways that enable them to remain within the work market, to remain within the job market, we are actually facing the emergence of a new crisis. Now, the problem, of course, with the crisis of this nature is that you cannot deal with it at an artificial level. You absolutely have to be willing to take the time to put the resources to deal with it at the granular, at the grassroots level. And that is unfortunately the one problem that South Africa hasn't really got right in recent years. So some of you may be aware that many, many years ago, the question of the profile of the higher education system in particular was a big talking point. And anecdotally, it was simply a matter of, well, now that you've arrived in government and you want to undo so many of the things, so many of the structural patterns that have been created over the past 40 years or so, what are the things that you need to do? And a focus area on higher education identified even back then that there was clearly an underrepresentation of Black graduates and Black students within the higher education system. So then the question was, well, why is there such a huge underrepresentation? And the answer was well known. In fact, it's a question that should not have been asked to begin with. The answer was well known, and the answer was that, well, because the Bantu education system in particular had been so focused on underdeveloping the skills of Black students, it meant that their ability to even transition into higher education was severely limited. And the few that did transition into the system were simply not thriving and they were not surviving. So in order to change that entire profile, you had to be able to confront the original question of what is the education system that needs to be grooming these young individuals into higher education over an extended period of time. And that simply meant that you have to go and fix basic education so that it would have a natural progression or an organic transition into higher education. Unfortunately, the political leaders of the day took a different approach. And the approach that was taken back then was to say, well, until we fix basic education, we can be able to do something quite different in relation to access to higher education. And that is where the idea of the language compensation policy came in. So what the language compensation policy essentially states is that if you are a student who has not been taught in your mother tongue, now that's the political speak. What they're saying is that if you are Black, what we will do is that at the exit point in matric, we will then go and look at all your marks and we're going to compensate you for the fact that you've had to deal with language struggles, you haven't been taught in your mother tongue, and therefore we're going to increase your marks by a factor of 5%. So that is, of course, a policy that has been universally applied since around 1998. What then happened when I joined academia in 2010 and 2011 is that I hadn't actually been aware of the policy and the manifestation thereof. But how I came to discover the policy was through anecdotal observations where you would be sitting with individuals whose matric certificates were reflecting much greater potential than what you were actually seeing in class. And I found that particular disconnect quite intriguing. And it was in one particular year where there were a lot of students in particular that had scored 100% in maths and physics and accounting. And of course, the very first thing that you see when you see a matric certificate that says that this person has scored 100 is that you assume that this person was #1 in the province or #1 in their region or in their district or wherever they may come from. And a lot of them said that, well, actually, we were not even invited to the award ceremony. So I'm thinking, well, if you got 100 and you're not #1, what does it take to become #1? And then a secondary question that emerged was to say, well, you got absolutely everything correct throughout the whole year. And the students would simply say, no, I did not get everything right. I actually didn't have 100% earmark. And because these are remarkably bright students, they could even tell you what they got wrong in the actual exam itself. So then the question was, well, if you were getting things wrong and you know that you're getting things wrong, how do you then end up with 100% being reflected in your matric certificate? And that's when we then started actually unpacking the mechanics of that language compensation policy. But the biggest crisis of that language compensation policy was not that the students were discovering it as randomly as I was. It was the fact that people within academia themselves actually were not aware of it, or at least they were not aware of how it was manifesting. And the consequence of that was that we then had all these classrooms across the country that were teaching and lecturing and working on unfounded assumptions. And the unfounded assumption was tested through some research that we did at UKZN in particular to say, well, let us assume that there is a student who is borderline across all 6 or 7 subjects. And what the language compensation policy does is that it then moves them across the line. So if they were a C average student, that compensation policy gets them to become a B. If they're on a B, then that gets them to be an A. And if you then look at the overall improvement in that person's academic progression score, which is the admission score, you could end up with a student who shows up in a lecture theatre saying about 42 points according to the government's education system and according to the university's own calculation. But it turns out that if you stripped out the impact of that language compensation policy, I'm a student with 36 points. So the question that we then asked was to say, well, are we teaching on the basis that we've got students who've got 42 points, or are we teaching on the basis that we've got students who've got 36 points? And it was particularly important in UKZN in particular, because the majority of our students were the ones that qualified for the language compensation policy. In other words, it was individuals who had not been taught in their mother tongue. So what then became a reality and a very clear explanation was that all the issues that have been ventilated by multiple researchers relating to the high dropout rates at first year in particular, relating to the high attrition rates and the low graduation rates, were things that were probably being aided by the fact that the university system itself quite simply had no idea who it was that it was dealing with. We had no idea of what the profile of the candidates were and the academic competencies of these candidates. The problem, of course, is that for as long as there were candidates within the classroom that did have 42 points, then the curriculum design sought to respond to those students in particular, rather than try to accommodate the students whose results were not an accurate reflection of their competencies. And that is something that we grappled with for years, and it turned out that it was universal across all different university systems, in that everybody works on the basis of what they've been given. There isn't a university that actually then says, now that you're within, we are going to work with you on the basis of your actual competencies, rather than the policy intervention that the state has put in place. And of course, with that being the reality, and the fact was that I was never going to change the higher education system overnight, the question then became, well, how do you assist these individuals manage that transition a bit better? And as it turned out, there weren't too many instruments of intervention that you could give to a student or two and say, well, go and look at this material, go and study this material, so that by the time we move on to the hard technical issues next week, you are you find the transition much easier. So the lack of those particular instruments meant that we created even more casualties in the higher education system. And these casualties were people who came into the system on the understanding that the system said that they were good enough. And of course, that definition of whether a candidate is good enough is not a question of how many points the candidate has had. It's a question of whether this particular institution is able to take a person with that number of points and transition them into a 3 or 4 year qualification with the fair chance of them succeeding. That is my assessment of what that fairness ought to be. And of course, for universities that haven't even bothered to design that in the first place, it then simply meant that the system was unfair and inequitable. And the consequence of that was that we are still stuck with high dropout rates, with high attrition rates, and very low graduation rates. And that is something that has haunted me for many years, because I kept thinking that surely there must be a way, surely there must be some instruments that can be put together, and these instruments must be put at the hands of the biggest stakeholders in the conversation and the students themselves. And that was something that was completely missing. So when I started looking at the undergraduate toolkit, when I started having conversations with Dr. Cassim about it, it then became clear to me that this is probably one of those instruments of intervention that we've needed for a very long time. Because what we really need to be able to acknowledge is that very few academics have the capacity, because of resource constraints, very few academics have the capacity to actually pay individual attention to students in instances and in classes where we've achieved massification. In other words, everybody's teaching many more students, or everybody's responsible for many more students than they were 5 or 10 years ago. So in the absence of those individual structured interventions, we need to have some autonomous instruments that can enable candidates, that can enable students to be able to work on that transitional pathway on their own. And when I looked at the chapters and some of the issues that get tackled in this particular toolkit, I felt that it was the one instrument that is moving us closer to cracking that particular conundrum. And that conundrum will obviously exist for as long as the South African government's education, and in particular its higher education policy, remains as it is. And I've learned the hard way that trying to tackle government tends to attract resistance rather than an embrace. So that's something that I've made peace with. But I think it's quite important for us to then make such instruments more readily available. And of course, the ultimate outcomes of all these interventions is that we will eventually have to deal with the big elephant in the room. And the big elephant in the room is that as bad as our unemployment crisis is, it has become very clear to a lot of individuals. In fact, the statistics show us that as soon as people have been aided to transition into higher education and succeed in higher education, then suddenly their ability to get into the job market, then suddenly their employment rates escalate. So the graduates that we have in South Africa have got much higher prospects of actually entering the job market. And that's, of course, something that would have been unavoidable and inevitable, because as you imagine, the skills developments across the globe and the job profile of today compared to the job profile of 10 or 20 years ago are so fundamentally different. It is very difficult to imagine that someone who hasn't got into higher education stands a chance. And the reason that it's becoming even more difficult to imagine is that even if there were jobs for people that don't have a higher education qualification in particular, because there are so many other people within the job market that do not have any qualification, or even those that do have some qualifications that haven't been able to get a job, it would mean those that don't have anything at all would be crowded out of the job market anyway. So it's become very clear to me that, unfortunately, for as long as the labor market fundamentals remain what they are, we need to be able to ensure that those few individuals that are able to transition into higher education succeed within higher education. And until now, that is something that the country has not been able to perfect. And I'm hoping that instruments like the Undergraduate Toolkit will be able to assist many more students across the system to be able to stand a better chance of actually remaining within the system and succeeding within the system. Because in the absence of that, we are indeed facing an intergenerational crisis of young people whose prospects of ever becoming fully enfranchised citizens will quite simply never exist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaya, for that very powerful and comprehensive keynote address, which really does set things in context very well for us. Kaya, we appreciate your time. I know that you have to rush to another appointment now as well, but thank you so much. Yes, on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for that excellent keynote address. Definitely food for thought. There's so much work that we all need to be doing. And thank you very much, Kaya. Okay, so colleagues, what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to share my screen, and I just want to show you what the Undergraduate Toolkit actually looks like. So it's available in hard copy on USB. So this is what the USB looks like, and it's also available online where it can be downloaded. Okay, this is a picture that, and I will email all of you this after the launch as well. So this is a picture that basically shows the different components, the different chapters of the Undergraduate Toolkit. So just as a snapshot, so you can see what this looks like. But now I'm actually going to take you through the contents of the Undergraduate Toolkit. So just so that you have a bit of a sneak preview. Okay, Kutsia will be taking you through this in more detail a little bit later, but just let you know what it looks like. So when you download it from Dropbox, or otherwise if you have the USB and you plug it into your computer, you'll see that this is what comes up. So there's a welcome. Part A is specifically for undergraduate students and also matriculants. So the Undergraduate Toolkit actually aims, the messages are aimed at two audiences. The first is the undergraduate students themselves. So that is our biggest audience, and that is really the target of the Undergraduate Toolkit. But then secondly, it's also aimed at stakeholders. So people involved in the undergraduate higher education landscape. So for example, lecturers, supervisors, support staff at universities, administrative staff, trade unions, organized labor, corporate sector organizations, funders, people who give bursaries. So we are really calling for a whole of society approach for different stakeholders to come together to better support graduate development. If we look at part A, so this is specifically for the undergraduate students, and this is the bulk of the undergraduate toolkit. So you'll see that there are 18 different chapters that cover a range of different topics, and Kutsia is going to be shortly giving us a presentation where she takes us through some of the key focus areas of the 18 chapters. 18 PDF documents. If I just choose one as an example, so let's say chapter 6, which is on mentorship. So you'll see that so this is an example of a typical chapter in the undergraduate toolkit. So you'll see that there's theory, so some lovely visuals. Thank you very much to our graphic designer, Sherry David, who did such a great job with the visuals. So we've tried to make the undergraduate toolkit, interactive, accessible, easy for students to read and to look at and to want to actually go through. You'll see also that there are various exercises that we have included throughout all the different chapters of the undergraduate toolkit, and these exercises are practical exercises that are designed to allow students to apply what they've learned to their studies and where they are at. You can see various exercises, so there's a lot of content and theory for each of the 18 chapters, and Kutsia will take us through the topics just now. And then at the end of each chapter, there's also a self-reflection and learning log as well. So that's just an example of one chapter. Okay, then. If I had to go back to, okay, so that is the 18 chapters. Then the second big stakeholder group. So here, we have actually addressed. So part B, for example, looks at a call to stakeholders within institutions of higher learning. This would include, lecturers, it would include support staff, it would include administrative staff within institutions. So what can we do to support them so that they are better able to support undergraduate students? So we feel that it's not enough to just focus on the students themselves, but we actually need to have a broader, more comprehensive approach where we look at different institutional stakeholders. So you can see that this part in particular talks to that. Okay, then I would also like to draw your attention to part D of the undergraduate toolkit. So here we've actually asked experienced professionals from a variety of different disciplines, so people who've been working in their fields for a long time, to just share some words of wisdom with undergraduate students. So some of the do's and the don'ts, some tips and strategies that experienced professionals would recommend to new graduates, to those who are studying, because if I had to reflect back, I'm sure that many of you had similar experiences. So during an undergraduate degree, no one really talks to us about, the world of work afterwards and what is required to make the transition to the world of work. And how do we study in a way that allows us to develop competencies that would allow us to, be able to find a job and to be employable in the world of work afterwards. So we asked experienced professionals across a range of different disciplines to actually just give us, some thoughts and some reflections on what they would view as key success factors for undergraduate students. So we are very thankful to those experienced professionals who have actually shared their views. Then in part E, we've done something similar, but now we've actually asked early career professionals, so early career and maturing professionals, so those, with less than 10 years of working experience, to just give us their ideas, because they are, they have more recently graduated, they have made the transition into the world of work, and to ask them from their perspective, what would they do differently, now that they've actually started working, etc. So it's very important. And I think also going back to the alignment that Kaya mentioned, the alignment between our schooling system and qualifications in the tertiary sector, but then also the alignment to the world of work. And are we producing graduates who would then be able to go on and do jobs, and or maybe if they want to be self-employed as well, but to address various skills shortages and skills development areas in the country. So we are also very thankful to these early career professionals who have then given us their words of wisdom as well. Thank you very much. Okay. Colleagues, so that is just a sneak preview into what the Undergraduate Toolkit looks like, so that you know what to expect when Kutsia is going to be presenting to us just now, and she's going to be taking us through the content in more detail. Before we get into Kutsia's presentation, I just want to thank all those who have been sending messages in the chat function, private messages as well. And I think that many of our colleagues are also just thanking Kaya Setoli for such a wonderful keynote address. As Herbert says, and Herbert is one of our presenters as well, nothing short of incredible information, indeed conveyed the main theme and the purpose of the launch. Absolutely. So thank you, Herbert, as well. I'm also glad that the technical issues seem to be sorted out, those who had problems with the microphone earlier. And Berenice, welcome, also just saying thank you for the snapshot. So colleagues, without further ado, before we get to Kutsia's presentation, where she's going to take us through the contents of the Undergraduate Toolkit in more detail, I would also just like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Jay Govender from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So Dr. Jay is going to just give us a few words. So Dr. Jay is a senior lecturer in the School of Social Sciences at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He's a very, long supporter of our work. So many years ago, when we were launching the Postgraduate Toolkit, Dr. Jay wrote a review. And now for the Undergraduate Toolkit, he has similarly been equally supportive. So he's done a review of the Undergraduate Toolkit. You'll find it in the toolkit. But I also just wanted to pass the microphone to Dr. Jay. Dr. Jay, over to you. You're welcome to unmute, and you can also, yes, you've got the video on as well. Dr. Jay, a warm welcome. Thank you so much for being available, and just thank you for your tremendous support for the Undergraduate Toolkit. So over to you, Dr. Jay.
Yes, good morning, colleagues and friends from everywhere in the country. Thank you, Layla. I think the association, with the family, and of course with you, goes beyond, the postgraduate toolkit. Your dad, Hussein, and your mom, Kuts, were radical students, at the previous University of Durban, Westville, who were very efficient troublemakers, basically began the kind of educational struggles, that we unfortunately, are still busy with. So it's taken us a very long time to get here. And it's very interesting that we're no longer in the protest mode, and that now we've shifted to the solution mode. So of course, I was very interested when I first encountered your postgraduate toolkit. I think I was at Nelson Mandela at the time, and brought you in, to sort of implement your program. And of course, I didn't see the sort of evaluation reports, of course, because I had left. But from messages from my colleagues and so on, it was very successful. We had a very good pass. Well, you had a very good pass rate, and that it's ongoing. So it's part of the sort of extended program being offered at Nelson Mandela. So congratulations for that. Of course, this is happening elsewhere in the country as well. So Hussein, very, very nice to see you. It's been very, very long. Greetings, bro. I hope you're well, and I think we're reaching this age now. We're supposed to be slowing down, but it's speeding up actually. So we will talk about it over lunch sometime. All right. I'll just speak, 4 points, if it's okay, Layla. The first is a Council for Higher Education Study, and I wanted to back up my my rhetoric that you will probably read around the Undergraduate Toolkit. Now, I wanted to back that up with some old data, and I'm sure that the colleagues are familiar with these numbers. But just to remind ourselves, as to why people like Layla and Kutsia and Hussein and Imtiaz and others are eager, at addressing this really dramatic sort of problem that we experience in South Africa. So the 2013 study actually sort of evaluates where we are in terms of higher education, and the numbers are really cruel. It says firstly that just 1 in 4 students who are in contact institutions, this is excluding UNISA of course, graduate in the required time of 3 years. 1 in 4 students graduate in time, with respect to 3-year degrees. The second number has to do with 35% of the total intake, right? And 48% of contact students actually graduate within 5 years. So what's that number? Focus on the 35% who graduate within 5 years. So you can see, the problem that we have in terms of the throughput, and why we have a kind of stuckness in our undergraduate programs, because it's just over 1/3 who are basically moving through that system. Now, when we account for the sort of numbers who are graduating and those who are not graduating, we find that an estimated percent of 55, right, of the intake never graduated. My number, in a study later, it said 60%. 60% of our students never graduate. They drop out of the system, and that's a horrid number. Now, of course, I don't want to go into the racial breakdowns and all of that. I think you're familiar, with the sort of nature and the characteristics of, of how the distribution of success rates in the different race groups. Now, ultimately, what we have, and the net result really is even, horrendous. We just have a number of 5% of African and so-called colored youth who actually succeed in our higher education system. I'll repeat that for you. Only 5% of so-called African and colored youth actually succeed in our higher education system. Now that's 2013, folks. I was concerned, that look, what has happened since 2013? And during the course of the week earlier, I started researching for myself to look for, any sort of data, right, that measures the quantum of change in higher education. I haven't read, for quite some time, but I decided over a period of 2.5 days to do some reading. And the study that I encountered was by Francois van Schaik, Melandre van Lille, Nico Klucher, and Tracy Bailey. And this is a very recent study, which was published on the 13th of March, 2021. And the findings of this study by these very eminent, academics, where the work was published in Higher Education, again, the prestigious journal. Now, here the findings basically tell us, an ongoing story of South African higher education. But the focus is actually on transformation. Of course, it captures, everything around the movement, progress, and so on in our higher education system. The first observation is that, the literature is loaded with rhetoric as opposed to empirical data on transformation. I've noticed that as well, in my personal readings around higher education. Policy-wise, that's my own comment, is that we haven't really moved beyond the 1990s. The white paper and all of that remain in that era. We now, 2022, and unfortunately, the state, the Department of Higher Education in particular, hasn't taken the leadership role here. So the second observation of the study, is that there is no sort of framework of transformation, and if there were, the focus actually, around the quantum of change had to do with equity, in particular the issue of race. So transformation in higher education thus far has simply achieved a reorganization, of the racial demographics amongst our students, because I was in a position, transformation officer, diversity and all of that, in which he simply would not accept that transformation includes other dimensions, not just the issue of race. And there we are, we still stuck, with respect to transformation. You see, we need to define these parameters, which will tell us, how efficient we've been, what are the rates of success, that we've enjoyed so far, or even the failures, as well as our rates of productivity. So because we haven't identified those very, very clearly, of course, individual institutions in the vision statements and so on have said something around this. But the kind of reports that we read, annual reports, don't tell us much about the national situation, all right? Because we haven't quite consolidated that. And just like, the kind of debates around, criminality, the data around that, and how the state suppressed this data for whatever, sort of reasons, we seem to have this similar kind of trend, a suppression of data with respect to higher education, which in fact defeats the sort of transformatory sort of efforts. We can only function on the basis of reliable and valid empirical studies. All right, so what then are we left with? We're saying that, look, that the political narrative, right, is really around no transformation. That no transformation has actually prevailed in the higher education system. So let me just summarize, and it's 3 points really. The first is the structural nature, of what we experience in the education system in general. Layla has articulated very, very well, the sort of continuities in the system, and I think isn't this excellent sort of understanding, of the structural nature that we of the problems, in fact, the defects that we actually encounter in higher education specifically. The second is that within institutions, so intra-institutional sort of intelligence around how do we help each another is just not there. Rather, we're just involved, with competing with each another. And of course, we have a disinterested state. I remember in a meeting with the minister then, well, still now, Blade Nzimande, who said that that the fault really lies with the higher education institutions, universities, for the problems that we actually experience. And he was the one that pointed to a study by Vali and Enver Mutalo. Vali is at UJ, I think, and Enver is at Nelson Mandela Institute at Fort Hare, who concluded that there isn't a causal relationship between the higher education system and the labor market. And I think that's what Kaya, in his input, was also saying to us. But so this is the state of affairs. I'll stop here, and thank you so much for inviting me, Layla. All right, thank you so much.
Dr. J, thank you so much. I always enjoy listening to you. Dr. J is such a gifted sociologist, and I always enjoyed listening to his sociological analysis, especially of now the higher education sector in South Africa. So Dr. J, thank you very much for that very in-depth analysis that you have given us. Colleagues, I'm going to pass over to Kutsia, who is going to be taking us through the undergraduate toolkit in more detail. So she's actually going to be, I gave you a sneak peek just now, but she's actually going to be taking us through the contents of the undergraduate toolkit in more detail now. And in particular, she's going to be focusing on those 18 different chapters so that you also get an idea of the focus areas, the learning outcomes for those 18 different chapters. But I think, before Kutsia starts, our approach has been in the undergraduate toolkit and also, with the postgrad toolkit, is that we look at the learning experience holistically. So we're not just looking at academic, and theoretical concepts, but very importantly, we also emphasize quality of life issues. So Dr. Edna Ruth, who's going to be speaking to us a bit later, she's written a chapter on self-management, looking at issues of self-care, well-being. We've got another well-being chapter in the toolkit as well. Because we recognize that many undergraduate students in particular are having to try and navigate the higher education space whilst they are facing a number of barriers and obstacles. So many undergraduate students are working, they have family commitments, they're under financial pressure, they're, all these different responsibilities, plus dealing with unfriendly and sometimes toxic, educational spaces, etc. So, and this is why, we're not just looking at the academic concepts, but we're also looking at well-being, wellness, quality of life issues as well. So we've tried to make the undergraduate toolkit very holistic. Kutsia, over to you. You're welcome to unmute, and also you can put your video on as well if you would like. Is Kutsia not with us? Okay, she is. Perfect. Can you unmute?
Hi, good afternoon, good day to everyone, and thank you very much to both Kaya as well as Dr. J for their very insightful contributions. I'm concerned about time. We have very limited time, together. So I'm not going to go through the chapters in detail. I can make my presentation available to all of you via Layla so that, you could get it in your inbox. And what's important is possibly the page underneath the cover of each chapter, because that will give you an overview of what the chapter entails. So it's going to be a quick whiz. There really is no time to go into detail. The toolkit is about 880 pages in total. It just got a life of its own after we had started with it. And we just had to stop it at chapter 18. So please bear with me. It's going to be an extremely fast whiz through each chapter. Right, we've dedicated the toolkit to our students. We hope that it can be an empowering tool, a self-help tool towards self-efficacy. And, most importantly, we want rippling effects. So, we talk about mentorship, we talk about, how students themselves can secure themselves, mentors and coaches on their journey. But at the same time, we're also appealing to students themselves to give of themselves and plow back. So the holistic focus that Layla spoke about is very important to me. I'm not an academic. I'm an HR practitioner. And, for me, it's always been about the person. I've witnessed it, with my children, So, part of this contribution is that as a parent as well, that, we can have all the resources and we can have all the tools in the world. So much has to do with the psyche, so much has to do with the level of motivation and the support systems that our young people have around them. So we're dedicating this toolkit to our students. And we're hoping that in a small way, it opens certain doors for them that allows them to build a career and a life in which they can be of service to others. The 18 chapters of the toolkit, some of them are extremely technical when it comes to academic skills. We dedicate chapters specifically to research, to reading, to writing tips. A lot of it has come out of Layla's Postgrad Toolkit. And in the Undergrad Toolkit, we'll be able to say to you, these chapters have been sourced and or adapted from the toolkit, from her toolkit. So there's about 3 or 4 of those chapters that are flowing from the Postgrad Toolkit, which we've adapted to suit an undergraduate audience. But the others are completely novel and new. And for example, sourcing potential funding. We're trying to look at the full trajectory, from the time the matriculant leaves schooling and enters the post-schooling domain and works himself or herself through the full spectrum. We're looking at orientation to academic life. We're looking at mentorship is a very big chapter. We're looking at a lot of tools that have been given to students to make mentorship work in their lives within and outside of the institutional context that they find themselves. When we look at, further down, library support, something that we take for granted, but just how important the library is. And in particular here, I want to thank Dr. Professor Daisy, the Wits librarian, who's also present here today. She specifically content edited that particular chapter and gave us very, very valuable input. So Dr. Daisy, thank you very much for that very, very specialist input into that particular chapter. Then I've also looked at grievance handling and dispute resolution. And it's something that, first-year students are not going to be even thinking about disputes. They're in a very exciting phase and they've just started at university, etc. But these things happen, disputes could happen, conflict could happen. What are their rights? How should they attempt to resolve conflicts? The different organizations and institutional support services that they could go to, such as the SRC and other counseling facilities available at the university. So there is a focus on conflict and disputes and how best to resolve them. And then more importantly, when we're looking at the person as a whole, self-care and well-being comes in. Dr. Edna Ruth has done an excellent chapter, that's chapter 15 on self-care, and you'll hear Edna shortly, so you'll be able to get a feel of what she's covered in her chapter. And then we brought in, the professional body. I recently concluded a mentorship contract with a government agency, and in that we had the responsibility to mentor about 150 graduates. So they were already out of university and we had to mentor them in the built environment disciplines, town planning, engineering, environmental science, etc. And what I discovered is that very few of them actually knew what the professional registration requirements of their professional bodies were. And, it's a matter of, you sit with the graduate and say, but this is what you need from a practical point of view. This is what you need from an engineering point of view. For example, engineering candidates. And that experience, motivated me to try and bring in a chapter specifically on introducing the professional bodies to students while they are still students, so that hopefully as they move through the spectrum, they can see the importance of getting to know their professional body quite early. And not wait until after graduation and then wonder, where do I go for experiential training? What do I do? How do I become a candidate? What are the financial implications to join a professional body, et cetera, et cetera? And then chapter 17 is looking at the world of work and that entire transition. So there too, we are encouraging first-year students that from your first year, start looking at possible employment scenarios. Are you going to go the route of looking for a job? Are you going to go the route of creating a job for yourself, especially under these very dire economic circumstances that we face ourselves in this country, and linking in specifically with what Kaya said in his introduction? You know, it's a gloomy picture. There are so many challenges in that area. So we're trying to get our students to open up and look at wide possibilities in terms of what could be at the end of the tunnel for them. Then the last chapter is handled by Meryl, and I'm not going to go into detail because she is going to be sharing her thoughts with us. She's specifically focused on students with disabilities. And we're very privileged to actually have a seasoned professional amongst us. Today, his name is Sechaba. You'll be meeting him a bit later. Sechaba has given us a very personal testimony that has been included in the toolkit. He's blind. He was born blind. And he shared part of his journey with us. And his topic is going to link in very nicely with Meryl's, and hopefully it will offer a more practical focus to what she's going to be covering. So Sechaba, a warm welcome to you, and we're looking forward to your presentation shortly. The different parts, Layla has already touched on that, so I'm not going to go into that. I think let's try and go into the chapters. I will make this presentation available to you, so there's no need to focus on all these slides now. I'm jumping straight to chapter 3, which is the navigation chapter. We are giving students tools in this chapter on how to use the toolkit. And the main focus is self-efficacy. So we're trying as much as possible to get them to become independent thinkers and to use the material available to them to actually work towards themselves becoming very independent and very, very, very critical thinkers. Layla spoke about the testimonies and the stories. I'm a firm believer in stories. So there's been a lot of stories that have been shared by both the younger professionals as well as the seasoned ones in terms of their particular journeys and what they're sharing and choosing to share with our learners and what learners can extract for their own benefit. Chapter 4 deals with potential funding for tertiary education, and it assists students in looking at different options. In this chapter, we also cover personal budgeting. It is so important. It's a life skill. So whether they are funded through bursaries, whether they have loans from the government, we are trying to draw their attention to the fact that money is important, it's scarce, it's a scarce resource, and how best to use it so that you can at least put that bread and butter issue to bed. And once that is put to bed, it's easier to focus on one's studies. So chapter 4 is dedicated to funding. Sorry, I've just got control of the host role now, and I'm just trying to let people in as we are speaking. Chapter 5 deals with orientation.
Could see, I'm sorry to interrupt, it's Meryl. Could we please ask, I think it's Ori's Galaxy A71 who is unmuted. We are getting sounds from there.
Okay.
Yeah, we could please ask her to mute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Meryl. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, chapter 5, orientation and transitioning to academic life. The focus here is specifically on the transition. understanding what orientation means, the importance of attending orientation programs at their institutions, and what type of supportive services are on offer, and how do students access them. And we're also looking at some personal tips. I know there's a guideline document from the University of Stellenbosch that has also been referenced here. They've got an excellent guide on how students can transition in a more effective manner. So we've actually brought that in as well, because those tips are actually quite generic and can apply to other institutions as well. So there's a dedicated chapter to orientation. Mentorship, Layla just briefly spoke on that. We go into a lot of detail. It's a massive chapter. I'm trying to encourage students at a very early stage to secure mentors for themselves, secure coaches for themselves, set up the mentoring partnership in a way that satisfies not just their academic development or research goals, but also their longer term career development aspirations. So they are being prompted throughout the toolkit to start looking at their lives from a longer range point of view, and specifically, if they are going to be specializing in particular disciplines, how best they structure their academic and their career development plans in a way that's holistic and in a way that's integrated to get them from A to B. Bullet number 6 speaks about an undergraduate learning and development contract. Now, those of you that's familiar with Layla's work, you know the PDC, you know, the personal and professional development contract. What we've done is that we've just adapted that for an undergraduate market, and that itself will become Chapter 7. So it's a standalone Chapter 7 on the ULDC, the Undergraduate Learning and Development Contract, and we've given them a very wide range of goal-setting scenarios. They look at their family, they look at academic goals, research goals, community-related goals, recreational goals. So that whole balance that we are after in terms of encouraging them to look at that balance in their lives starts filtering through in tools such as the ULDC. And then we've given them many templates. Templates are there as guideline documents. They can adjust those, they can adapt them to suit their own needs. Chapter 7 is that ULDC. It covers a whole range of goals that students are encouraged to set for themselves. They are guided in terms of timelines. Are they short-term goals, medium-term goals, longer-term goals? And it's not just goal setting. They get a page where the goals are going to be clarified. They're going to pen them down. But then after that, there's tables that follow. And in the tables, they actually have to take the goal and break it down into activities. They then have to work out what resources are they going to need, what possible mitigation factors have to be taken into account if they are going to be facing risks in terms of those particular goals, time frames. If they succeeding, how will they know that they're succeeding? How will they know that they've actually arrived? So it's a very comprehensive document, and it constitutes a chapter on its own. And that would be Chapter 7. Chapter 8 is adapted from Layla's Postgrad Toolkit. It's on reading. We place a lot of emphasis, especially on bullet number 4, where we're looking at practical tips and strategies to enhance reading comprehension. Chapter 9, academic writing and formatting tips. All right, here again, a huge thank you to Dr. Daisy. When we invited her to preview this chapter, she asked specifically that we bring in a whole section on plagiarism. And that was very, very valuable input. So in this particular chapter, there's a huge section on plagiarism and alerting students at a very early stage in their academic journey that let's avoid this, let's work around how we're going to become natural and authentic writers, that yes, we research, but at the end of the day, the work is our own. Learning and study guidelines is quite theoretical. It looks at the do's and don'ts and the nuts and bolts of learning and study strategies. It's a very big chapter, and it's right in the center of the toolkit. Now, you may get the more serious student that will actually go through all of this and say, fine, I'm going to try and get as much as I can out of this chapter. And especially the early undergrad that's coming into the system. I think it's going to offer them quite a lot of stimulation in terms of how to structure and set in motion a learning and a study schedule. So there's quite a lot. It's about 100-page chapter, and it goes very deep into study and learning objectives. Chapter 11, Layla wrote, and that's on research. So she goes quite deep into it, introducing undergrads to the world of research and introducing them to concepts. Especially in research design, research methodology, they must become aware of ethics at an early stage, the things that go into choosing a supervisor, and some writing tips for a mini thesis. Library is a dedicated chapter. It's chapter 12. Grievance handling, chapter 13, looking at some types of, typical types of conflict that students are likely to encounter, how best they resolve them, the role of the ombud at universities, and especially the role of the university's SRC, how they can tap into those resources to ensure that they have an easy transition into university life. Well-being and self-care is a dedicated chapter. That's chapter 14. And we've introduced them, to some of the concepts that, generally, undergrads are not going to come into contact with, such as communication tools, such as the Johari window, and others that, they can start at an early stage getting familiar with and use for their own self, for themselves. In other words, to try and improve self-management and self-discipline on this academic journey. This is Dr. Edna Root's chapter, and you all may know Edna quite well. She's the life orientation guru in the country, and we were very privileged to have her accept our invitation to contribute a whole chapter to the toolkit. Edna, thank you very much. This is the content of her chapter, and Edna's made it extremely practical. She's got lots of exercises thrown throughout the chapter. She's got numerous video links that takes students into those video clips, and they can see and do what she's advocating. It's an excellent chapter. It's practical. It's written at the level of most students. Chapter 16 speaks about the professional body that I spoke about earlier. It introduces graduates while they are still in the undergraduate years of their study to their own professional body, what it means, how do they go about registering, becoming members. They get exposed to the whole area of critical and scarce skills in the country. And they start looking at CPD at an early stage. So that's a dedicated chapter. That's chapter 16. And then 17 is an area that I'm very passionate about, and that is the transition into the world of work. How do they build a career portfolio? We're taking people away from the traditional old-fashioned CV, because those things have gone out the window now. We're encouraging students at a very early stage in their academic careers to start building portfolios of evidence. They must collect artifacts, a whole lot of things that's going to define who they are. So by the time they get to a potential employer, they've got an armor that they can put on the table and say, this is who I am, this is what I've achieved to date, and this is what I'm prepared to offer your organization. Meryl is going to talk to her chapter on disability shortly, so I'm not going to spend time on that now. And then that takes us to the end of chapter 18, And that culminates part A of the toolkit. And Layla has already touched on part B, C, D is the testimonies of the older professionals, and part E is the testimonies of younger and mid-career professionals. We have a user feedback form in the toolkit as well, so that we can encourage people to talk to us about how they've experienced the toolkit. And we have a reviews section. We're privileged to have some of those reviewers with us here today. And part of our vision for the toolkit is to make it accessible to every single student in the country. We don't have it in Braille yet. I'm hoping that we can secure some funding to have the toolkit translated to into at least 2 other South African languages, to make it available in Braille so that our visually impaired students can have access to it, and that also our community libraries can benefit from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kutsia. I had to relinquish hosting rights in order for Kutsia to be able to share her screen. So I'm just resuming that now. Thank you very much for that detailed overview of what goes into the toolkit. Colleagues, some of you have been asking whether the toolkit, the undergraduate toolkit, will be also available in a printed format, so in a hard copy printed, and yes, it will be upon request. So we've got it on USB, we've got it online, but if you would like a physical printed copy, please also just get hold of us. Right at the end of the session, I'll show you the order form and the inquiry form, which we'll also email to you afterwards. So if you would like a printed copy, you are welcome to get that as well. As Kutsia mentioned, it's more than 800, almost 900 printed pages. So yes, definitely, if you would like the hard copy in printed form, that is possible. Right, so our next presenter is going to be, and so before we move to Dr. Edna Ruth, I also just want to thank Kutsia because she's co-authored several chapters. She's written many chapters in the Undergraduate Toolkit herself. Thank you very much, Kutsia, for your contributions. Right, then we have Dr. Edna Ruth. So Dr. Edna is the Director of Life Skills Africa, and she has written chapter 15 of the Undergraduate Toolkit, which is on self-management for success for undergraduate students. So I'm just going to share my screen. And Dr. Edna has kindly given us a pre-recorded presentation, which we are going to listen to. So thank you very much, Dr. Edna.
Well, what an exciting launch. I want to speak a little bit about the benefits of the Undergraduate Toolkit and a chapter called Self-Management for Success, which is one of the chapters in this very valuable toolkit. If I were a student, job of lecturing their particular subject and topic that they are qualified for.
Okay. My apologies, colleagues. Let me just restart the presentation because I think that some of you were not able to hear. So let me just start it from the beginning again.
Well, what an exciting launch. I want to speak a little bit about the benefits of the Undergraduate Toolkit and a chapter called Self-Management for Success, which is one of the chapters in this very valuable toolkit. If I were a student I would definitely use the Undergraduate Toolkit. And if I was still a lecturer, I would make sure that every student had access to this brilliant resource. Now, there are so many benefits to the Undergraduate Toolkit. First of all, it can assist lecturers to free them up to get on with their job of lecturing their particular subject and topic that they are qualified for. It also helps to set students up for success, and it becomes the students' go-to place and space. It's their home to overcome obstacles and challenges. What is self-management for success about? We interviewed many students, past students, current students, and lecturers, and they gave us topics that they felt were essential, because we asked them, what would you do differently if you could be a student again? What did you need that you didn't get when you were a student? So from the many topics they gave, here is a short list, and this is the basis for this chapter. So students spoke a lot about self-confidence, being able to speak in class, developing assertiveness, and establishing your personal brand while you are still a student. And of course, managing stress and emotions and motivating yourself to manage time, managing your network to build strategic relationships that can last a lifetime, and managing social media so that it works for you, not against you. And finally, the value and power of volunteerism. So many students said, if I could be a student again, I would volunteer from my first year onwards. Now, self-confidence, speaking in class, and assertiveness is essential, because confidence is like oxygen. So if students can speak up, make their voices heard, occupy their spaces, if they can ask, challenge, debate, discuss, and assert their rights, life as a student would be much easier than if they are too shy to speak up. Sometimes classes are very large, and speaking up in class becomes public speaking. So to get students to embrace the opportunity, therefore there are activities to help them to build their confidence, because that is the core. Because what matters most is how you see yourself. Managing stress and emotions is vital, because having that balance of time for rest and relaxation is so important. Being a student can be extremely stressful due to so many pressures. So there are some tips here on how to manage and prevent stress. And there's some very useful links for short videos, because we know students are really busy. So there's short videos to just help them with breathing practice and learning how to breathe properly and reminding them to breathe. Now, time management, we say, is motivating yourself to manage time. It's not just about time management, because most students know something about time management, but it's that inner sense of needing to motivate yourself to manage time that is important. Because the worst scenario is if you don't keep up with class attendance, or you arrive late to class and you submit your assignments late, and you don't follow your study timetable for tests and exams, then life as a student becomes very chaotic, and it's so hard to cope. Being on campus is like being on a continuous treasure hunt. And it's such an opportunity to build your network that can be of great value. So there are hints on, exploring your campus, finding what is available and using it, and building relationships. So it's not only relationships from the past, but now and for the future. Social media can be such a great study buddy for a student, but they need to avoid letting it become the enemy. So let social media work for you instead of against you. And there are quite a number of hints and tips of what you can do to make sure you are safe and you use social media wisely. And finally, this section on the value and power of volunteerism. By volunteering, students add such useful experience to their CVs. They explore their interests because this is an opportunity to do and see more and go outside the lecture room and discover their potential. And most importantly, students are then part of building our communities and country. And for example, there's a higher health peer-to-peer education program on campuses. So that's a great place to start, and students even get training on how to be a peer educator. So definitely each one, teach one, and reach one. So finally, my advice is again to use the Undergraduate Toolkit, because by managing yourself, you are making your own luck. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Edna Ruth for that lovely presentation. I must say I appreciated the breathing and the sound of the you know, that horn that was going through. I think that definitely helped me as well. Colleagues, our next presenter is Tabitha Mochaki. So Tabitha is a senior lecturer from Sedibeng TVET College, the Sebokeng campus. And Tabitha is going to be talking about the outreach of the Undergraduate Toolkit. So I'm also just going to play her pre-recorded message.
Good day, everyone. Like it has been mentioned, my name is Tabitha Mochaki, and I'm a senior lecturer here at Sedibeng TVET College, offering the subject life skills and computer literacy. So I have been working with the youth for now, I think, about 10 years. So this project gives me so much honor, and I really hope that the experience that I'm about to share will help shape up a young person's life. So I would like to talk about a little bit about the importance of managing your studies and prioritizing what you do with your time. So working with the youth on a daily basis exposes you to a lot of challenges that they go through, and you end up being more of a mentor really than a teacher in trying to assist them somehow the best way possible to try and help them shape up their future. So, you know, we are experiencing high cases of teenage pregnancy, and we have a lot of young mothers out there who still love to pursue their studies. With that being said, this reminds me more about my experience when I've just successfully registered for my honors degree. I had so much mixed emotions, you know, considering that this was very exciting for me, that I got an opportunity to somehow, you know, grow my career. But at the same time, I was worried that I had a little boy with me that I also needed to consider for his needs. So, you know, I knew at this point that for me, I had no other choice but to make sure that I come up with a strategy that was going to work for me, because at this point, failure was not an option. So this is the strategy that I'd like to share with young people, and hopefully maybe this might work for you as well. So what I would usually do is, on a daily basis then, I would do my daily chores as expected, like cooking, cleaning, and making sure that I also assist my child with his homework. And then after that, what I would do after a long day's work, I would make sure that I go to bed at exactly 8 o'clock. having to wake up at 3 a.m. So this is the opportunity that I got to actually, have peace and quiet and be able to work without my son distracting me. So from 3 a.m. I would start working until 6 o'clock when I would now prepare for work. So if I would do this Monday to Friday, that would give me a good 15 hours because it's 3 hours a day. So, one would think that this might be very strenuous considering that you somehow have to transition from working in the morning, or rather during the day, to working now in the early hours of the morning. So this is where you get to somehow establish what is it that you can do best during the day and what is it that you can do better during the early hours of the morning. So this whole journey taught me that you have to come up with a plan that's going to work for you. The minute you don't have a plan, this presents a lot of opportunities for failure to start knocking at your door. So this is what I'd like to share, that, young people should always remember it's always important to prioritize what you do with your time. And that always remember that, for your dreams to be possible, you have to work hard and you have to put efforts into making them possible. So I really hope that this strategy will help you as much as it's still helping me today. And I really hope that it's going to help shape up your future as well. All right then.
Amazing time management tips there that Tabitha has shared with us. Thank you so much, Tabitha. Our next presenter is Herbert Makgopa. So Herbert is going to talk about the need for undergraduate students to seriously plan for and consider professional development. Herbert is an intern medical scientist at the University of Pretoria and also based at the National Health Laboratory Services. So Herbert, over to you. It is an honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Program Director. To Dr. Layla Cassim, colleagues in the Skills Development Project, chaired under the leadership of Ms. Layla Cassim, keynote speaker Mr. Kayas Tole, invited presenters, guests, and everyone following today's event and proceedings. Good morning. It is indeed an honor and privilege for me to be part of this academic event of cognitive refreshment and engagement and to deliver a talk. The main purpose of the talk is to cleanse academic and professional development in the higher education context, and thereby appreciating the value of the undergraduate toolkit for both academic and professional development of graduates in the making or students working towards a degree at a university or college. Now we'll turn to the outline. The subject can be looked under the following headings. Number one, introduction to the subject matter or bit of historical perspective of the academic and professional development, academic and professional development strategies of graduates in the making, benefits of graduates in the making participating in academic and professional development, perceptions of academic development resources, value of the new undergraduate toolkit for both academic and professional development of graduates in the making, and lastly, concluding remarks. Firstly, scholarly interests, or rather, the phenomenon of academic and professional development of academics as a body of research dates to the early 1960s. This was in response to a range of widespread changes affecting higher education. Among others, rising concerns about the quality of university teaching as a cause of student failure in evaluation of academic and institutional performance. That will have later led to the creation of university centers or units for academic development. Just as academic and professional development are to academics, academic and professional development are to graduates in the making. My next point is academic and professional development strategies. Academic and professional development strategies of graduates may come in all different sizes, shapes, and models. And among these include applying for prizes awarded by the school or the community engagement office, being able as a representative on a committee at your school, joining student clubs and societies, getting involved in conferences, mentoring and tutoring, volunteering, or through relevant summer jobs or part-time work. Having said all this, what are in concrete terms the benefits of academic and professional development strategies? The next slide, please. First and foremost, academic and professional, these are just some of the benefits. I've just indicated this for illustration. Academic and professional development may improve students' networking skills and help them to make important connections with a myriad of people, from students to leaders in their profession. And of course, ways to do this is by attending conferences. These conferences are often held by education associations that have specific members' goals and collaboration opportunities, even something as simple as speaking with a presenter at a poster session. Another way to do this is by conducting alumni associations or career offices at the university, who can actually put you in touch with former students or join on relevant LinkedIn groups. This, of course, holds potential or will inform students of invaluable opportunities in their field, and they can gain valuable insights into a profession and get their name noticed. Secondly, this can boost the resume of students and improve their job prospects. And of course, important way for students to achieve this is by volunteering or through relevant summer jobs or part-time work whilst at the university. This can give students the opportunity to practice. I think I'm still on the previous slide. Okay. This, I was just actually explaining in terms of how this, how students can approach this. An important way of doing this is by volunteering through relevant summer jobs or part-time work whilst at the university. And this can give students the opportunity to practice important skills used in the workplace, such as teamwork, communication, problem solving, project planning, task management, and organization, just to mention but the few. Another interesting point that I would like to make is perceptions of the academic resources for students. While we know about the importance of graduates in the making, academic and professional development, developmental resource for undergraduate students in some cases are inaccessible or presented in such a way that students are unable to use them. Furthermore, part of the available academic resources are limited in that they are not satisfying the unique or specialized needs of the students. And therefore, what is needed, therefore? Needed is an instructional method, educational service, or school resource tailored to student needs and interests while accelerating their learning progress, meeting learning standards, and ensuring overall success in their higher education and beyond. And of course, the new undergraduate toolkit designed and developed by Dr. Layla Cassim in partnership with the Renaissance Network is one such educational resource and has an exceptional possibility to deliver milestones. Turning now to the value of the undergraduate toolkit. I'll just going to summarize a few points here as have already been highlighted in the overview of the toolkit. This number one, the undergraduate toolkit or rather the undergraduate toolkit holds potential to helping graduates in the making to reflect on what they want to achieve in their professional life, increasing opportunities for graduates in the making to gain a well-rounded education intertwined with professional skills, promoting best practices and a positive mindset for successful undergraduate learning and development. In conclusion, as there is a shared international belief that undergraduate education should be a foundation for students' academic and professional development that prepares them to be global-ready graduates and lifelong learners. The new undergraduate toolkit ensures that graduates in the making make the most of the higher education experience and leave higher education prepared for the real world. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much, Program Director and everyone attending. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Herbert, for highlighting those very important aspects about professional development. And you can see that it dovetails very nicely with Dr. Edna Ruth's presentation, where she also was talking about volunteerism in particular. And that's something that Herbert has been emphasizing as well. So thank you. Thank you very much, Herbert. Our next presenter is Leola. So Leola Nyoka, who is Manager of Business Risk and Compliance at Standard Bank of South Africa. And she's going to talk about the Undergraduate Toolkit as a resource both within and outside of the university. And colleagues, just to let you know that all our presenters have actually written pieces, in the Undergraduate Toolkit. So, in parts D and E, where we've asked early career and experienced professionals to share their words of wisdom and their tips and guidelines for undergraduate students. So all of our presenters here have actually, who are talking now, have actually contributed in those sections of the Undergraduate Toolkit. So Leola, over to you, Leola. You are welcome to unmute. Leola, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, everybody. So I know this is mostly, the toolkit is mostly focused on students entering the higher education system. I can honestly say that I've been a perpetual student. I've started really late in my life to study because I started working straight out of school. So it took me some time to actually decide on what I wanted to do with my life. And I think the fact that I was earning a steady income at a very young age didn't help much in getting traction and focus in my life, because at that time, having a steady income with no dependents, still living with your parents, you felt like you had enough money to sustain you for the rest of your life, which is a lie. I can somewhat tell you that now for the ones just entering the field of study. So what I found very helpful about this toolkit is, since I've started studying late in my life, and at that time I had a full-time job with a child, a lot of responsibilities, this actually helped me focus now because I'm busy doing my LLB this year. So this has actually helped me focus on getting a work-life balance to a point where I don't feel as overwhelmed as I used to in the past. Because although I studied constantly for a few years, I think from 2003-04 up until today, it was like a rat race. Everything just felt so demanding and so pressured, and it felt like I was constantly chasing my tail. This helped me focus to see that you need that balance, and that your life as a whole, whether it's education, whether it's working, whether it's your personal family time, everything is interlinked. Where you lack in one place, it will impact the other. So this helps to get balanced to a point where you need to focus not just on getting your assignments on in time, getting your work projects on in time, but you also have to focus on getting time for yourself. Because there's a saying that says you can't fall from an empty vessel. So if you are depleted, if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling stressed out, you will not deliver on all those goals you have to juggle. What I've also learned is that in my current role, this is like an opportunity to be a mentor to my co-workers. Because I've been constantly studying, it's easier for me to motivate them to do the same, because I've broken it up into smaller chunks. I know generally, like for an undergraduate, it's like 3 years. If you do an LLB, it's 4 years. But if you have other responsibilities, I've stretched mine over a good couple of years. I've completed my BCom law and a whole lot of other compliance regulatory stuff over the years. But I've done it in a way that I've actually broken it up. If it's a 3-year thing, I didn't mind taking it over 4 to 5 years. My motto has always been that you must structure your things so that you have time for yourself, time to rest, because you need to rest and you need to be prepared you need to be well rested so you can function optimally in your other spaces. They say that you must, when you get tired, you must learn to rest and not quit. And that's basically what I've done over the years. But this book, just getting to know, because I've got a small version, a summary of the book, and it gave me so much insight as to how interlinked everything in your life is, that you can't just solely focus on one side of the spectrum and not the other. You can't solely just focus on, I'm a student, so I have to just focus all my energy on that and then lack on your family time. Everything needs to be balanced out. Your whole life needs to be balanced out. And this book is a great tool for you to balance everything out. For the guys that went to varsity straight out of school, this is a good opportunity for you to basically map where you're going. It has a whole lot of inspirational, subjects from other people. So you can see, you can structure it in a way that you can see that you're not in this journey alone. I know first-time varsity students, this feels very pressured, and you feel like it's a whole new world that you don't know what you're doing. But if you read this book, you'll see that there's other people that felt exactly the way you're feeling, and that will give you the tools that you need to cope in that environment. The only thing that you need to focus on now is to find what you want to do, set yourself on that direction, and then move forward from there. I like a quote from one of my fashionistas that I follow, Ceci Jones. She says that you have to get on track with what you're doing, but you need to self-develop and you need to improve yourself in that track, because you can still be run over by a car even if you're in the right track, if you're stationary. So my message to you today is find your passion in what you want to do with your life. Find a work balance life between your studies, your personal life, if you're a working student, your work life, but don't let the other overshadow each other, because you're going to find a point where you burn out, and once you've burned out, everything's going to seem like a mammoth task. So take this toolkit, make the best of it. There's a whole lot of things that will help you to manage those times and to make it a whole lot easier for you to navigate the new chapter of your life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leola, and all the best with your new degree that you have embarked on. Colleagues, our next presenter is Nico Yonka, who's a retired professional civil engineer. And in particular, he's going to talk about the shift from theory to practice for engineering candidates. To all our presenters, I don't want to put you under time pressure, but if I can ask you just to be a few minutes only, just that we can try and squeeze everyone in before we have to close. Thank you very much, Nico, for being available. And over to you. I'm going to start your slideshow in a second. Thank you, Nico.
Thank you so much, Layla. Hope you can hear me well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Nico. We can hear you.
My short topic is proven way from theory to practical engineering. And there are obviously many ways of doing this, but I want to emphasize the importance of mentoring and coaching. One of the previous participants made a comment, if only I knew this when I started. And I want to echo that. What I've written in the toolkit and what I'm presenting to you, how I wish I knew all of this when I started. Next slide. If you look at your entire life cycle, you will see that there are various stages, which are also called seasons, that you will be growing through your whole career. It is like a pier stretching over the water, and you are now at step one, and you need to go all the way, and you almost can't see the end of this pier. Now, I want to emphasize three concepts here. There are three circles, this brick color, reddish on the left. It emphasizes the importance of climbing a ladder. You see the different steps. But there are stages in your career when you have climbed to a certain stage and then you have to come down before you start climbing again. And that's important to know. Are you at this stage going up or are you going down? And I want to make a quick example. If you started your school career, you actually start in grade 1, you grow up till grade 7, and now you're senior in your primary school and you think you are there. And then you go to secondary school, to high school, and guess what? You start from the bottom again. The same when you go to tertiary education, the same when you step from tertiary education into the work of life. You have to get to the bottom before you can start climbing. And then looking at the middle one, at the blue one, I asked a question there, where do I start and where am I aiming? It's very important that I know in what direction I would be going. And the last yellowish circle asks the question, how much time do I have to get there? It is so important that you have a good idea of how long it will take to have a realistic expectation. For me, it's like standing on, once you've completed your theory, you're standing on one side of a stream. It's really a torrent, it's a rough water. How do I get best to the other side? Next question. You have to climb your career ladder. Each one of us want to climb it as fast, as quick as we can, but you have to climb it steady, one step at a time. Next. If you look at the different, and Kutia made mention to the councils that actually take care of the quality of the works that you will be doing. It's like a watchdog. Extra requirements, next slide, next print there. Extra requirements is that you must finish at least 3 to 5 years after education qualification. 3 to 5 years relevant experience. It means that you have to really focus on what you have to learn. And there are 11 outcomes that EXA is measuring. They want to see that you are a real problem solver. Next one. This more or less summarizes what I'm trying to tell you, how to safely and speedily cross your stream. If you look on the right hand, there's all these blocks, and these blocks represent the different subjects that you've been taught, the different aspects of the task that you'll be performing. Now, your mentor, looking at the bigger picture from left to right, from top to bottom, the whole 11 outcomes. What do you need to do to satisfy the council that you are really competent? But you will have different coaches. Each coach is an expert in his or her field. You have an expert that teach you how to do surveying, how to work in a design office, etc. So all these coaches work together, building the blocks, but the mentor guides the whole picture where you should be going. Next slide. Now, my wish for you is that that your sun may really rise, and that this would be a real adventure for you as a professional technician, technologist, or engineer. Next slide. This is just in conclusion. There's my contact details. If anybody wants personal guidance, you're welcome to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico Jonker, for that, giving us insight in terms of, and especially for engineering undergraduate students. Thank you so much. Our next presenter is Sechaba Tauniane. Kutsia mentioned Sechaba earlier on. Sechaba is an employment equity consultant for Rand Water, and he's going to be talking to us about learning resources for students with disabilities. Sechaba, always an honor to have you at our events. Over to you.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much, Sechaba.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm really, as Casey or Kutsia has said, I'm a person with a disability, blind to be specific, and yeah, I've been born blind like that. By the way, I hope there won't be any distractions. I'm in an office, open plan, and yeah, hopefully there won't be distractions. But basically, what I'm going to talk about as a person with a disability, I mean, it's, you know, my experience in terms of the university life, in terms of how things have been. I mean, one having moved from a very protected environment. In fact, I was saying earlier on when I saw Makosazana's comment to say that one wishes that we had this toolkit as well, you know, in the 90s when one joined the university, because you would find that I'm sure would have benefited from such a toolkit, you know, coming from an era whereby as a blind person, one had to rely on the reading of other people, you know, where you had to rely on people reading for you on tapes and stuff like that. I mean, technology has evolved, of course, with a new era of transcription, with a new era of fast braille transcription. Things are a bit much better. But as I said, you know, in my writings, that people with disabilities usually had to struggle, you know, when it comes to university, whereby, for example, university either would be inaccessible, for example, for people on wheelchairs, you know. You come into a class, you are a deaf student, and you find that, for example, that the lecturers don't understand that you have to have an interpreter. Or even if you have an interpreter, for example, you find that it was kind of difficult for you as a person with a disability, whereby the lecturers would be talking so fast to such an extent that the interpreter cannot even interpret for you as a deaf person, you know. I remember myself one of the situations whereby, you know, I was in one lecture whereby I was given notes in large font, and I said, but no, I don't need that, because, you know, as a blind person, you don't really need large font, but you need your notes to be either on audio or to be printed. So basically, and as I'm taking into account the time here, basically what I'm going to say is that it's very important that as students, we familiarize ourselves with this toolkit, because it does give some guidance. And I heard that Kutsia was saying that they will try and transcribe the toolkit into braille. For me, the most important thing, if it's electronic as well, it's very accessible, because with these new devices that people are having now, it's very easy for blind people to be actually reading the transcribed material, whereby you would find that they will be in a position to read it on audio using the screen reader like JAWS for Windows that I'm currently using, and other devices for blind people. So the toolkit will be very important there in terms of making sure that lecturers and students get to understand each other, get to know what are the challenges out there, but the most important thing, how then to navigate such challenges for blind people, for people with disabilities, and all that other challenges for other people with other disabilities other than being blind or on wheelchairs, you know. So yeah, really, this is my message to everyone, to say that the toolkit is very important there. Thank you, Layla, and thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sichaba, for sharing your experiences with us and for those recommendations and suggestions that you have given. Definitely, it is one of our aims to have the toolkit put into Braille as well. And that leads us to our next presenter, Dr. Meryl Du Plessis, who specializes in disability law, and Meryl is the managing member of Red Cord Pty Limited. Meryl, I know you're going to be touching on some of the things that Sichaba has just spoken about now. Meryl has authored a chapter in the Undergraduate Toolkit specifically looking at overcoming ableism for students with disabilities.
Thank you very much, Layla, and may I please just also take the opportunity to congratulate TRN and Layla Cassim, ERS consultant, for this fabulous project. I'm very proud to have been a small part of it, and I wish that many students will be able to benefit from it. I would like to focus my talk on the rest of us, or I actually shouldn't say the rest of us, because it draws that stark distinction between those of us who live with disabilities and those of us who do not. And very often those groups intersect. We're not very often disability is described as something that happens to other people, something that's very separate from the rest of us. But like with all forms of social oppression, it's not the victims or the survivors of a particular ism, whether it's ableism, whether it's racism, whether it's sexism. Whose challenge is it? And I think in university context, as with all contexts, the challenge is everyone's. So the chapter and the way in which I wrote it really focused on the fact that, yes, students with disabilities have to find a way to navigate ableist structures, and the fact that life really is not set up to include them. It should be, but it's not. But also, what do we do as a society in order to make it more accessible? And this has been a real challenge in my 14 years of teaching at the university. And I taught law, constitutional law and labor law for a really long time. And it's not really just about disability, it's the fact that structures are set up for those who created them in the first place. So language, for example, in a discipline such as law, where you basically weaponize language, it's English speakers who are advantaged because that's how it's been set up. So similarly with disability, everything has been set up on assumptions of who we are. So we all ambulate by walking. That's not true for many people. I would be embarrassed because wheelchair users, my students who are wheelchair users, I would need to assist them to get into the library. Or in some instances, I would have to go into the library to take out books for them because the library was inaccessible. Very often when you try and speak to university authorities about it, you will get answers such as, oh, these are heritage buildings, we're not able to change certain things. So there is a very big fight still ahead of us in order to improve accessibility. We have laws. I mean, I wrote a PhD on laws trying to improve access in work context. But when people come to me, when we speak about the practicalities of it, there are a few things I think that we have to take into account. And I would like to mention a few. One, not all disabled persons are in the same position. So in order for any sort of support to be effective, there has to be a consultative process. You have to consult. You can't just assume. It can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. And unfortunately, with how society have been set up, everything is about standardization. So a lot of work when it comes to ensuring accessibility is about unlearning, about doing things in a way that we are not used to. So there's a lot of discomfort and experimentation that needs to go into improving accessibility, which makes it a challenge, but also an opportunity to improve our higher education institutions, not only for persons with disabilities, but for all of us. Secondly, the issue of money, because that's also what you hear every time you are insisting that accessibility should be improved. There are many accommodations that we can make for persons with disabilities without having to spend money. Very often it's about attitudinal change, changing our attitudes. And I think that when I speak to persons without disabilities, one of the things that I find particularly distressing is this notion that you know, for persons with disabilities, it's their problem, there's something wrong with them. Without us actually doing the work to implicate ourselves in problems, very often we're not going to solve challenges, or we're not going to overcome challenges unless we realize our own complicity and our own responsibility in solving that problem. So my talk really isn't geared at persons with disabilities, because the problem is structural, firstly, and it's about the attitudes of persons without disabilities. Those of us who are enabled because life is set up to benefit us. And here it requires us to place ourselves in the shoes of other people, which is not something that comes easily for many people. And so I think that really, in terms of what we require at universities, we have resources that have been set up. So we have disability units, which I speak about, or which I wrote about in the chapter. Liaising with those disability units, at the moment, my personal experience and from speaking to colleagues, very often there isn't really, because of various time constraints and structural constraints, there isn't really a lot of interaction between lecturers and those people who work at disability units. So very often we would all work in parallel, trying to support students with disabilities to overcome obstacles. So that liaison function, I think we could work towards improving that. Those who are doing that already, I think they're doing very important work. But I think also at class level, the practical aspects of it, I think that it's the nuts and bolts, it's the everyday experiences that we will have to manage. I end off the chapter by speaking about the experience of a student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal who is deaf, and about how the university thanked her for advocating for herself, because it allowed the university to improve its processes and to equip itself to improve. And I think at the beginning stages of this process, that is where we are actually going to have to teach institutions about how they can improve. And that sort of process that is not just in one direction, but that is really a consultation of everyday learning and improvements, is not always easy in massive structures, but it is something that we have to tackle, and it has been done with success in many institutions. So hopefully, we can continue that work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meryl du Plessis. Meryl, thank you also for the chapter that you have contributed to the Undergraduate Toolkit. Colleagues, we just have one more quick presentation, and then I'm going to talk about how you can get a copy of the Undergraduate Toolkit. So our last presenter is Alyssa David. So Alyssa is a final year B.Ed student, the founder for Catalyst for Change. And she's going to be talking about bridging the gap from school to university. And I think it's useful for us to hear Alyssa's, from Alyssa, because given that she's a final year student, it's also an opportunity for her to reflect on her undergraduate experience, what she would have liked, the needs that she had, gaps that she perhaps could have identified. So I think perspectives from undergraduate students themselves are particularly important. Okay, so Alyssa, over to you. You are welcome to unmute.
Good day to everyone. As Layla has mentioned, I'm Melissa, and I'll be talking about bridging the gap from school to university and breaking the organizational barriers of the academic journey. So, as you can see, let's grow, because constantly at university, you're being told, you know, let's go, we got to do this. And you're constantly on this high of, I need to do this. And as other speakers have mentioned, sometimes not even having time for yourself, for your family, and not being able to make that distinction. So I think that this undergraduate toolkit will allow not just undergraduate students, but lecturers and people, role players in the academic journey to grow. So who am I? As Layla has mentioned, I'm a final year B.Ed student, and I'm the founder of Catalyst for Change, which has been running since 2017. It's solely an educational-based NPO. So we deal with science education, maths education, and so forth. So why is the academic journey and breaking organizational barriers important? Well, as you all might have known, South Africa has one of the highest Gini index scores of the world. So a score of 63, which indicates that there's major disparities between rich and poor. So the economic stratification of our country seems to be very negative, because on one end, as you've seen in the KZN flooding, Durban, on one end you have, just down the road, you have a very rich area, and then just another road, you see shanty towns, etc. So this negative skew in our country, the socioeconomic state has, well, it basically has the negative skew, and this has a cascading effect on the people, and this can be seen through education. So education is not just a means of understanding why do we have these disparities, but it's a means of change. So if we move on to the next slide. So I am fortunate that when I was in high school, I was able to go, well, I went to both an ex-Model T school and I went to a public school. So I could make that comparison quite easily, because I switched over from an ex-Model T school to a public school midway through my grade 11 year. So I could see this disparities firsthand, and it's something that my social conscience wasn't able to accept and think, okay, no, it's fine, that's just how life goes. So then you go about looking at an achievement gap or an opportunity gap. So because South Africa has a very rich cultural history, we have a very rich history in terms of understanding the apartheid regime and everything that happened. So we have to look at it from that perspective. So firstly, going to a public school, which was in a township called Phoenix, and you look at the lack of resources in these schools, and I'm not just speaking for Phoenix schools, I'm speaking for schools throughout, because South Africa is made up of almost just over 90% of public schools, if you look at the stats, as compared to private sectors and ex-Model C, etc. So the historical aspect of why do these schools have a lack of resources, as you may know, if you read the book, The Right to Learn by Pam Christie, this would put it into good perspective for you. So these schools were built for people of certain race groups. For example, Indian people went to a certain school, and Black and white, and you know all of this already. So the lack of resources in these schools, it's just stayed over the years. There hasn't been much change for the past 20 years or so. And you'd see this in these schools if you'd visit them. There's just a picture there that you can look at. And most of these schools still operate like this. This is not pictures from 1999. These are pictures from the current day. And then we look at the apartheid. So the apartheid regime used education as a means of control. And that is why I mentioned earlier that education is also a means of change. So we look at these words, control and change. And whereas education was something that was said to have so many social inequalities, and it was meant to oppress at the time, because we've seen this in the disparity of education. Now we move on to the democratic government where, so the idea of control was, okay, let's start with education. As I said, the cascading effects. So yeah. So then you go on looking at the post-apartheid government and the laws and policies. And as Meryl has mentioned, all of these policies that are set out, we look for equality and equity. So as new challenges emerged, as things are happening in the new day and age, sometimes these laws may not, or these policies may not bridge the gap and not seek to provide the correct support for learners. So then that is what learners are experiencing within the high school, primary school setting. Learners are exposed to many things. So when they are going into the setting of the undergraduate, they're starting off their first year, it's hard because if you move on to the next slide, you'll see that it says, let's go to school and study together with our classmates happily. And happily is something that stood out for me because most of the time, the journey, the academic journey isn't a happy one because learners face other barriers, being many other socioeconomic barriers, the non-nuclear family and all of that. But this focuses on the organizational barriers and why the undergraduate toolkit will assist to break the barriers. So organizational barriers are policies or procedures that unfairly discriminate. So discriminating not just against people with disabilities, whatever, it makes it inclusive for all individuals, whatever you're facing, be it whatever barrier. So from my personal experience being at campus for the last 4 years, I feel that the organizational barriers were absolutely something that was frustrating for a student because you're trying to contact somebody and there's nobody to contact and it's difficult. And you can't go to your lecturer all the time because obviously they're busy trying to lecture and emails and phones and you're trying to communicate, but there's a barrier for that. And campus sends you a whole lot of documents where, okay, here's a referencing tool, here's this, and it's not all in one. So you're struggling trying to juggle all these different modules and you are now juggling, trying to figure out all these different modules by looking, okay, how do I reference with the Harvard style or the APA style? And then you go about saying, okay, but plagiarism, how do I get a lower index? And it just gets so overwhelming. And I feel that's what contributes to most of the learners or my students, my colleagues dropping out of campus because I saw the numbers just decrease from being like 100 in a class to now 60. And then now we're sitting with like 50, almost ready to graduate. So it is a difficult time. And I feel that the undergraduate toolkit will assist in providing matric students with the correct information and the correct ideas to make their choices for their undergraduate journey, which would encourage learners to understand the journey and not just go at this journey blindly. So yeah, so there's a quote by the Eagles, you can check out anytime you like, but you just can never leave. And that is how I feel that the academic journey is. Once you get stuck, or not the word stuck, not with a negative connotation, but once you are in this journey, you can't leave because you're always a learner. And as a future teacher, almost nearly qualified teacher, we are lifelong learners. So thank you. And I'm thankful to Layla for offering me this opportunity, and congratulations on this wonderful effort of putting together this UT to all of the role players and contributors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, for that very powerful presentation, and all of us wish you all the best as you conclude your B.Ed degree, and congratulations and on what you have already achieved, and wishing you all the best for your future career. Colleagues, thank you so much. I hope that you've enjoyed the presentations. It's given you some insights in terms of topics that have been covered in the Undergraduate Toolkit. Thank you so much for all the kind words and the messages that have been coming through in the chat function, the private messages that we've also been receiving. Thank you so much. We've just got about 2 or 3 minutes left, and I'm just going to quickly show you the Postgraduate Toolkit, and then the details about how to get both of the toolkits. Okay. So we've had a look at the Undergraduate Toolkit. Our Postgraduate Toolkit covers the entire research process from beginning to end. There are 10 chapters in the toolkit, from how to write a research proposal to research design and methodology, thesis writing, how to publish papers, project management principles in research. And then we also look at self-empowerment topics as well. So stress, wellness, health, disability, time management, the student-supervisor relationship, career management, so building a long-term research career. So the Postgrad Toolkit contains all of these different components from A all the way through to S. So there are the 10 written chapters. So all in all, 988 written pages of content. There are 48 practical exercises across the 10 chapters of the toolkit, questions for assessment, and then also voice recording. So what I've done is to make the Postgraduate Toolkit more interactive and accessible. I've developed PowerPoint slides for each of the 10 chapters, and I've done narrations for those PowerPoint slides. So it's a total of 25 hours of voice recordings in the Postgraduate Toolkit. And those voice recordings have been given in narrated PowerPoint format and also in MP4 videos that you can actually just download and play from smartphones. So hopefully that makes the Postgrad Toolkit more interactive and accessible as well. A self-defense video, which is also part of our ongoing commitment, especially for women's empowerment and women's safety. Colleagues, that's just a quick look at the Postgraduate Toolkit. And then also, I'm going to be having an autumn school for postgraduate students. Let me just see if I can show this to you. Okay, so I'll email all of you this as well when I send you the recording of this session. I've got a 5-day autumn school for postgraduate students, which will be held from the 16th to the 20th of May, online on Zoom. So I'll send you the brochure so you can see the content of what is covered in these 5 days. So day 1, the research proposal, day 2, research design and methodology, day 3, thesis writing, and then day 4 is publishing, applying for funding, the student supervisor relationship, and then day 5, we have some guest presentations as well. So that is on the 16th to the 20th of May, and it is followed by a 5-day online publishing or writing retreat. So the aim of the retreat is that, by the end of the week, you have a full draft of a research proposal or a thesis chapter or a paper for publication or a funding application, and I would have given you feedback on that. And the writing retreat is co-hosted with Dr. Meryl Duplessis. So colleagues, if anyone would like to attend the autumn school or the writing retreat, the closing date for registrations is the 2nd of May. So we look forward to welcoming you to that. Then many of you have been asking about how to get a copy of the Undergraduate Toolkit and also the Postgrad Toolkit. So I will also email you the order form. You can get either toolkit online, so through a Dropbox link. So with the Undergraduate Toolkit, 600 Rand, excluding VAT. We do have a special introductory offer. So to anyone who's been at this launch, we have a 2-week special. So if you were at the launch, you can then get 100 Rand off. So you'd be able to get it for 500 Rand, excluding VAT, but it's within 2 weeks. So this offer will then lapse on the 7th of May. That is one option if you'd like to purchase an individual copy. So if you want to get it online, you can then download it through the Dropbox link. Otherwise, if you want to purchase it, if you want to get the USB, you can as well, and we will courier mail it to you. If you want to get the USB, that is a little bit more expensive because of the postage cost. But I will email you the order form so you can see the exact pricing. If you want to get both the undergraduate and the postgraduate toolkit, there's a bit of a discount if you get both of them together. We are hoping that many of you would like to do that, because it just covers the entire trajectory from undergraduate then to postgrad and building a long-term research career. The second option that I wanted to mention is that your university or your organization can actually get an institutional license, where the university can then get a license where they put the either or both of the toolkits on their intranet or the online platform that the university is using, and then it is available to all staff and students at that particular university. So the University of Limpopo currently has such a license for our postgraduate toolkit. So it's a 3-year license, and the Postgrad Toolkit is on the UL website for all staff and students. So if anyone here is interested in getting an institutional license, please also contact us afterwards, and we can then discuss that. So we can discuss the duration, how many years you would like the license for, you know, how many students and staff you have, etc. So we are committed to trying to make both toolkits as accessible as possible, you know, to allow as many students as possible to actually use the toolkit and hopefully gain from it as well. All right, so that is just what I wanted to show you. I would also like to say a special thank you to all our presenters. A very special thank you to Kaya Setole for that very powerful keynote address that he has given us, and to each and every presenter for sharing their expertise and their time with us. I would also like to say thank you very much to all of you as guests for attending, all the reviewers. I see Dr. Pelani Nongogo from Swana University of Technology is also with us. So thank you so much to everyone who has contributed. You know, they're saying that it takes a village to raise a child, but in this case, it's taken a village to create this undergraduate toolkit. So the early career and the more experienced professionals who've given their insight and their testimonials in the undergraduate toolkit, the presenters, you know, those you know, who've contributed behind the scenes, all the hard work that has gone into producing this undergraduate toolkit. So thank you so much to everyone for all the hard work. I would like to give a special thank you to the David family, and in particular to Shari David, who is our amazing graphic designer. And you saw some of the pictures and the visuals, and she did such a wonderful job in laying out the undergraduate toolkit. So Shari, thank you so much to you and the team. I would like to thank my family who have made this product happen. So we've all worked together, you know, so, and we look forward to being able to share the undergraduate toolkit with all of you. Colleagues, I think that that brings us to the end of the launch. I'm just trying to catch up also with the chat function. Thank you so much for the kind words that have been coming through. If there are any further queries, you've got my email address. So it will just take some time for the Zoom recording to download. But as soon as it has downloaded in the next few hours, I will email all of you the recording of the session. You're also welcome to share the recording with others, perhaps who weren't able to attend. I'll also send you a copy of Kutsia's slides, where she took you through the content of the undergraduate toolkit, so you can see the learning outcomes for each of the chapters. So I'll share Kutsia's slides with you. I'll also send you the order form if you would like to get a copy of the undergraduate and or postgraduate toolkits. And I'll also send you the advert for my upcoming autumn school and writing retreat. If there is any way in which we can assist, please just reach out to us. You have our contact details. You know, we hope that we can work together and that we can collaborate with you. You are here from many different institutions. We have senior management of many of the universities that are with us, universities within South Africa and also universities in other SADC countries in particular. So we welcome opportunities for collaboration and for us all to work together to see how we can make the undergraduate and postgraduate toolkits available and easily accessible and available to all your staff and students. And also, in this section on the undergraduate toolkit, where we talk about stakeholders, so those of you who are funding undergraduate students, so the CSIR, for example, has a big, graduate development program where they give bursaries. So to funders, let's talk about how we can, work together so that perhaps the undergraduate toolkit can go into part of the pack that your students receive, so that hopefully it makes it a bit easier for them to actually complete their degrees, which is then a return on your investment as funders. So I think that there are many discussions and ongoing discussions that we look forward to having with everyone. So from my side, a very big thank you to everyone. I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the Friday afternoon and the weekend coming up as well. A public holiday next week also, as we mark a very important occasion in South Africa, which is Freedom Day. So colleagues, thank you very much for your attendance, and a huge thank you from my side to all the presenters for the excellent presentations, the beautiful slides and videos that have been shared with us. And please do keep in touch. And if there's any way in which we can assist, please, please do get hold of us. So thank you so much. We appreciate all the messages that have been coming through, and I will send all of you a recording shortly as well. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm not sure if there are any final comments. I have just given you the ability to unmute. So if there are, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 quick comments. If anyone would like to raise their hand, if you would like to use the microphone and give the comments, that's fine. Otherwise, the chat function is also fine. So thank you very much again to everyone. We look forward to working with you in the very serious and important task that we all have ahead of us, when it comes to graduate development and skills development in South Africa. I'm not seeing any hands go up, but colleagues, I'm assuming then that you will get hold of us via email if you do have any questions. Herbert, thank you so much, Herbert, for your lovely presentation and for your very kind comments coming through. So take care, everyone. Please be safe. Look after yourselves as well. We are still in a pandemic, and the COVID numbers are starting to increase quite a lot in South Africa. So please do keep safe, and may you all be blessed. Take care. Bye-bye.